segment is brought to you by Zenith Bank.
Welcome back. Nigeria's public debt has risen to about 159.28 trillion naira as of May 2026, raising fresh questions about the country's borrowing strategy, debt sustainability, and how borrowed funds are being deployed. While the federal government attributes part of the increase to the naira's depreciation and inherited liabilities, concerns remain over the pace of new borrowing and its implication for Nigeria's economy and future generations. This morning, we'll look at Nigeria's borrowing strategy and style, how it affects you, your business, and so on. We have the principal partner at Woodridge Scott Consulting. Mr. Segun Sopitan joins us live in the studio. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Sopitan.
Good morning.
Good to be here. Good to see you guys.
Borrowing. Here we go again. And I mean, I'm going to start off first by looking at how far we've come when it comes to borrowing. Every single time, especially from the previous administration, we've seen borrowing. There's ways and means. We saw borrowing from the foreign countries, and all we get is it's being used for XYZ. Yet Nigerians are still questioning if these borrowings are necessary. We've heard that even bigger nations borrow. America is the biggest borrower in the world. I'm not talking about being a borrower. I mean, I had to say.
See what you
Benga is a borrower.
Pun intended.
For real. That was a good one. Well done.
What do you make of these borrowings, first off?
I mean, there are several ways to look at it. On the one hand, you're right. It's not necessarily a bad thing for a country to borrow. And as you've said, most developed economies, surprisingly, have very huge debt profiles relative to their GDP. And that's one of the reasons that our government would say, oh, we're doing well. Our debt to GDP ratio is still around 40%. The United States is well over 100%. Japan is almost 200%. However, the flip side of that debate is, number one, what are you doing with that borrowing? What are you doing with the money? Can citizens see the direct impact of the borrowing? And then secondly, can you service the debt? What does your borrowing do to your capacity to do other things? What does it do to flexibility in terms of funding, financing your national priorities, and so on and so forth? So if you come from that angle, I think it is a bit disturbing, especially if you look at it from the perspective of how quickly things have escalated in the last 3 years. People who speak in support of government's actions would say, well, yeah, there's been an escalation, yes, but a lot of that is attributable to depreciation of the naira. Because a lot of the debt is in foreign currency.
Dollar denominated.
Yeah, dollar denominated. But having said that, off the top of my head, just doing a rough calculation, because I do track these things, we probably are talking of at least $20 billion as fresh borrowings in the last 3 years.
That's a huge amount of money.
That is unthinkable.
If you compare it to our forex receipts, what we're receiving and earning.
And if you compare that to the track record of previous administrations, I mean, we had, how much did President Obasanjo pay off? Was it not about 30 billion? So in 3 years, and that was legacy debt that had been accumulated over decades. So in 3 years, we've accumulated almost as much as what Obasanjo paid off. We have to be worried.
So let's talk about the mechanism, the system for borrowing and the guardrails that are there. Oftentimes we see Mr. President rise to the National Assembly, and the same National Assembly that rose and sang in unison, on your mandate we shall stand. I don't think Nigerians expect much from it, much scrutiny. It's failed in its duty of oversight with regards to loans. So what's the proper step, and what sort of scrutiny should we be giving debt requests going forward? Because they hand in these letters every other few months, and I mean, the results is a foregone conclusion that they will definitely approve of it.
It's a formality. The president of the Senate of Nigeria, some people have now tagged him as senior special assistant to the president on
legislative matters,
on ceremonial events, because he goes to represent the president. I don't think people understand how abnormal this is.
Very abnormal. Executive and legislature.
Exactly.
I mean, these are people are supposed to be cat and dog.
Rolling in his grave.
Yes,
right now.
You know, like these are supposed to be cat and dog relationship where you are not necessarily enemies, but you are not friends. You are constantly at each other's throats, trying to make sure that one is doing the right thing, you know, and so on and so forth. To find this kind of chummy, in fact, the Senate president says the president is their father. You know, that's how bad it is. So, given that context, it's not surprising that the request for new borrowings are a formality. The president knows that all he has to do is ask and it will be done. And it's not only just done, it's done without scrutiny, and it's done, you know, very quickly. Now, what does that do? The questions that ought to be asked never get asked. Even if it's just for the optics, ask these questions now. What is the money going to be used for? One, what is the structure of the debt? Two, in terms of repayment obligations, the tenor, you know, and all of that.
Interest.
The interest, you know, component. And how will it be paid back? What project is it using? Are we using it for? Is that project going to generate the revenues by itself? Or are we going to rely on tax revenues or other sources of revenue to pay it off? Those questions never get asked, and we need to start asking that question every time, you know, there's a new borrowing request. So sadly, the Senate will not do that, and I think it's up to citizens to continue to, you know, hold the foot of the government, you know, in the fire.
All right. Subsidy removal was a policy that, yes, garnered some criticism, but also garnered some support. It was supposed to free some money up. So if money was freed up, then why is that borrowing still this high?
I mean, look, you get different answers depending on who you are speaking with, which is unfortunate because there should be only one answer.
I'm glad we're speaking to Segun Sopitan this morning.
Segun Sopitan.
Sorry.
So there should be only one answer. The answer is absolute clarity with regards to how much has been saved, who has gotten how much of that money, and what they are using it for. I've repeatedly stated that it's just simply not good enough that the president is now deflecting and pointing us in the direction of the governors when people ask what has happened to the subsidy savings.
FAC allocation.
Yeah. I mean, the governors did not remove subsidy. The president needs to remember this.
But
it was a policy of the president.
The governors are getting more money now.
Yes, they are. But he was the one that said our fiscal situation is dire. We're in an emergency. We must take subsidies out to save the country from collapse. Therefore, if you have taken the subsidies out, your decision, very brash, very sudden, you owe Nigerians accountability on the outcome, not the governors, right? So I expect somebody like, for example, the Minister of Finance, the new Minister of Finance, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who is very cerebral, you know, very well-versed, a professional, you know, a professional colleague, if I may say, right? I would expect that he would understand the importance of accountability and transparency in this conversation and deploy technology to achieve it. So, for example, you can have a dashboard where you are showing on a monthly basis FAC allocation to different states and subnational, you know, units, and on that same portal showing what component of that receipt is as a result of subsidy removal. And on that same dashboard or portal, showing what is being used for. I don't think it's good enough for us to just say, oh, people that were owing salaries and pensions before are no longer owing. So you are saying that you threw Nigeria into the kind of hardship that we have experienced in the last 3 years so that we can pay salaries. That was not the promise. That was not the promise was that when subsidies are taken out, you will see improvement in social infrastructure, social services. You would invest that money in healthcare, in education, in transportation. And in 3 years, none of that has materialized. At best, we've seen tokenistic efforts, you know, to CNG. The CNG thing is a debacle. If you know any CNG station, the few as they are, people sleep there for days before they can get
It's
fuel.
almost like the fuel scarcity days.
So it's almost like you've taken people out of, you know, you've extracted them from this situation where you can drive into a station. Well, it's their choice. And now they're just back to the terrible days under Buhari where you can't get fuel for 2 days.
Okay, I like the fact that we've looked at it from the government aspect, all right?
Yeah.
And it's very key that we establish that while we have this conversation this morning every Monday morning. The next phase we're going to go to now is to look at how it impacts heavily on businesses. SMEs at least make up, if not more, but 96% of Nigeria's business space, one of the highest in employment, contributes hugely, about 48% to the GDP. But how do these debts affect businesses from the SMEs? These are the conversations we're going to have. But let's go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll have that conversation. Stay with us. We're back on Breakfast Central. All right, let's continue our conversation right after the break. We're looking at, just during the break, we're discussing, most importantly, looking at the impact, how much, and so on.
Benga said he wants to pay his own debts. I was asking for Mr. Taiwo Idele's contact so he can pay his own debts.
Benga is the case.
Yes, or debt management office. So that I can manage my own personal debt.
So that when they say Nigeria owes, they know that Benga Borowa is not one of them.
Even though your surname is Borowa, sounds like
the Oro is another Oro festival. Don't incur the wrath of the gods this morning.
Let's get back to session.
All right.
Small businesses.
Yes.
We've looked at it from the government aspect. Now, we're going to close that door and open the other doors. Let's calm down. Let's trickle down a bit. Small businesses in different states. When the government borrows, how does it affect the lady who has a salon? The one who runs a shop where she sells, groceries and so on. Another one who is busy trying to get into photography and own a photo studio. These are small businesses that employ people real time. How does it affect them?
Well, I guess you could say that the impact is more of a long-term thing than an immediate one, because what happens when the government borrows is, first of all, borrow as heavily as the Nigerian government is doing, and with the effect that the borrowing is having on the free cash flow, so to speak, that the government has to do other things. Nigeria is still spending about 70% of its revenues on debt servicing. That is absolutely
if the head of a family does that, he will be looked at as an
irresponsible person. Even the children will start
revolt.
Advising you that, Daddy, don't you think you need to do better, right? 60 to 70% of our revenues go into debt service. So what that means is that the government does not have enough money to invest in the things that those people need to do well. For example, electricity. When you speak of SMEs, one of the biggest problems that they face today is power supply. And you can't do without it. So you have to make arrangements, either because by buying petrol or diesel at the rates that we know they are, or by finding a way to put some sort of alternative energy supply in place. Either way, it's expensive. And that constricts your profit as a business. Meanwhile, because your debt service obligations is taking so much of your revenues, you are forced to continue to borrow. So we're trapped in this debt cycle where your debt, if you look at the deficit, the amount of money that, is financed by deficit in the budget. Two, the amount of the budget that goes into debt service obligations in the budget itself. 30% or thereabouts of the budgeted numbers for 2025 budget was for debt service. 30%. These things are crisis level numbers. These are things that should cause us to stop and say, no, hard stop, we've got to fix this.
That was actually going to be my next question, because I would imagine that in any home, you all have homes. If more than half of your income was going into debt servicing, it would call for a crisis situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the alarm bells will go.
Absolutely.
So the question is, why isn't that same level of panic? Maybe panic is not the word I want to use, but why aren't we as worried or alarmed by this at a national level as would be if it was in a family?
And they say we are not the only family. Look at Japan, look at US.
Yeah, exactly. So now, to take the example of Japan and US, their tax revenue to GDP ratios are significantly higher. The revenue to GDP.
Revenue.
So you are talking 30%, 25%, up to 40% in some cases. Nigeria's number is still hovering around 10%. And it was as bad as 6% just 3 years ago under Buhari.
Wow.
So this president's efforts towards ramping up revenue has made that picture a bit better. but it's nowhere near where it can be, where it should be. And that's another impact that I wanted to talk about before I address Olive's point, you know, which is that as a result of this debt, the government feels the need, rightly, to increase revenues, and the drive for revenue from government is off the hooks. You know, they're going after everybody.
I'm sure you've seen that animation of Mr. President squeezing on Nigeria.
and this is child's play compared to what will happen next year. Because right now, you know, elections are in the offing, and the government, being politicians as well, will be a bit careful. Once the elections are over, and if the president gets re-election, get ready for a very bumpy ride.
And even the IMF has recommended that.
So for businesses, what does this mean for them?
I mean, look, you first of all, so one of the things is, first of all, the majority, and this is a fact, the majority of businesses will not be impacted directly by this drive for taxes, because they will fall below the threshold that the Tax Act sets. However, because the loopholes for escaping the tax net have been closed out almost completely, people that were not paying taxes at all, or that were understating their taxes, will not be able to do so anymore. And what that will mean is that people are going to be spending a whole lot more on taxes, because government will be raking in a whole lot more, which means they will try to compensate by increasing their prices. So we are going to see some inflationary trend, you know, as a result of full implementation of the tax, you know, the tax reforms and all of that. And that obviously will have an impact on the cost of doing business.
Where does tax rebates come in?
Sorry?
Where does tax rebate come in for especially big businesses?
I mean, look, for big businesses, it's a political thing. So if you're a Dangote, for example, you know, or an Elumelu, the big boys, they not only get tax rebates, you get tariff waivers, you know, and all of those things, which are subsidies in themselves for big boys. You know, so that's a different conversation in itself, you know. So at the end of the day, it's not looking healthy, the way we're managing our public debt situation. And I've always advocated that government needs to get creative with how we fund public finance, with how we fund infrastructure projects. We have to look beyond government financing these things by itself. I mean, how much can government possibly do? Government is supposed to be a catalyst, a trigger. So you put the policy framework in place.
And incentives.
You put the incentives in place. Maybe you put some sort of counterpart funding in place. But the predominant proportion of financing for public infrastructure projects should come from private capital. You know, so we need to get to the point where we have creative structures that can harness the finance that is available. The money is out there, whether outside the country or even within the country. But I think our governments are we're not being rigorous enough with the thinking to rake in this money.
Are we borrowing because there's a huge infrastructure deficit? Or are we borrowing to fund, to pay salaries and, you know, just keep government operations, the wheels of government rolling? Because you look at the Oronsoyen report, for example, that recommended that we should shrink the amount of agencies and MDAs that we have, but it doesn't seem to have been implemented. So what can we do in the interim to reduce our debt burden? Because if you say we should stop borrowing, then we'll stop having major infrastructure projects.
Well, I mean, what infrastructure projects do we have, really? When we say major, the infrastructure deficit that we have, whether you talk about roads, whether you talk about rail, you know, is gargantuan. We're talking in trillions of dollars to bridge that gap.
So we're only barely scratching the surface.
We're just scratching the surface, right? So I've always struggled with the idea that, the monies are being invested in infrastructure projects, because I say, where are they? Where's the visibility? So what you see is, you see occasional pictures on social media, on Twitter. Somebody will say, look at this roundabout, it's been fixed, you know, and all of that. But we can't approach this conversation that way. There ought to be, again, some sort of dashboard framework where, you know, citizens can go and see the work that is being done across the country and who is financing that work. Let's not forget that what happens in Nigeria is not up to federal government alone. It has to be the federal government. For making the information, it has to be the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Working maybe in conjunction with the National Orientation Agency or something like Ministry of Information. but it has to be the responsibility of the federal government working hand in hand with all of these subnationals and these agencies so that Nigerians can get visibility. The problem I have is that there is no visibility. We've been thrown in at the deep end of the water. We've been told to swim. We've been told to be patient while we're swimming. But nobody is telling us why it's happening or what we're gaining as a result. And for me, that is a big problem.
Have we kissed the days of the possibility of a cancellation? Goodbye.
I mean, that will never happen again, not for Nigeria. I mean, why would anybody cancel our debt?
Former President Obasanjo is still alive. He did it. He can do it again.
Okay,
But that was 1999.
You have to go to 2003. You have to go. You have to go to Ota to go and get him. And maybe you should also go and get Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to bring her back to go and help us beg. But I think that Nigeria's situation has changed significantly from where we were then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, as individuals, as business owners, bearing in mind this information you shared, how does this impact our finances and what plans should we make to better safeguard our financial state?
I think the biggest problem with, living in a country with the kind of debt structure that we have is that the government cannot fulfill its obligations to citizens. So you're on your own. So what that means is you've got to think about yourself and your family first and do whatever you need to do legally, obviously, to meet your obligations. But plan for rainy days, be careful with your spending. There is no buffer anywhere, there is no social safety net, there's no welfare system, that will take care of you.
And be careful to how you respond to Happy New Month.
Yeah, and subsidies are being withdrawn systematically from every sector as a result of all of these reforms. So the basic point there is, as a Nigerian, you've got to be smart. Don't expect help from anywhere. How many people can access NEL Fund? How many students do we have that need to go to university? And how many of those students are currently accessing that fund? How many citizens are accessing credit score?
NEL Fund is discriminatory because it doesn't apply to
everybody.
Students in the humanities. And I mean, if I schooled during the time of NEL Fund, I wouldn't have access to it because I studied mass communication.
Yeah.
They look down on courses like mass communication.
Yeah, and there are demographic restrictions to who can access the money. But the withdrawal of subsidies cut across board.
At the end of the day, it's still a loan.
It is a loan.
My final question would be that, I mean, if the country is taking loans, Nigerians are taking loans, would you advise businesses to take loans?
Debt in itself is never a problem. And I always tell, maybe because I used to be a banker, debt is not a problem. It's what you do with it. What did you borrow it for? So if you're going to take a loan and you're investing it in income-generating
franchise projects,
then that's okay. If the loan can pay itself back, and obviously you must have done your homework properly, so things don't go wrong.
Your homework, there could be another homework, which could lead to
absolutely.
So for example,
That's life.
As a babe now, I cannot take debt to buy very nice human hair.
No.
Please, I beg you. Don't use loan to buy human hair unless you are going to sell it.
Exactly.
If you are buying the human hair because you want to also sell it, so you buy one for yourself and then buy another 10.
Because management to look and say, Olive is so beautiful, we need to increase our
Olive, my birthday next year.
I'm sorry,
the Ashwebi will be out.
I'm not going to advise you.
Keep some money aside for
to
my
do
birthday.
that.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, I see.
My final question as a wrap
pleasure
up,
to have
I just want to ask, so in the area of FDIs...
Joe, that's your fourth final question.
Yeah, I mean, final.
The
area of FDIs, capitalists, and then you have multi-currency businesses. Does debt affect all of that?
Not necessarily. FDIs are FDIs. What drives that is the investment climate, which is not very attractive at the moment. That's why you are saying that you are not getting enough FDIs, you are getting FPIs. You are getting portfolio investment, which is hot money, as against direct investment, which is, productive, and all of that. So the investment climate, the macroeconomic indicators, those are the things that are going to bring in the FDIs, not necessarily your debt profile. Debt is all about how well you're able to manage all of the factors surrounding the debt itself. So I wouldn't want to draw a direct parallel between the two.
Thank you, Mr. Sopitan. Always a pleasure speaking with you. And as part of my own personal take feedback from this conversation on planning for the rainy day.
Yes.
I have decided not to be responding to Happy New Month or wishing people happy birthday
Billing,
on
they
WhatsApp
come
because
anytime.
the billing will follow.
Should I tell you what happened? Should I tell you what happened to my friend? I know he may be watching. If he's not, I'm going to mention his name, Matthew Edafe. While he was sharing his number to people who were together last month, he said, please, as you have my number, please do not send me Happy New Month or Happy New Week. I don't want those messages. And I was shocked.
Happy New Month in advance, Joe.
This segment was brought to you by Zenith Bank.